Hi there fabric jugglers, it's Babs here from My Fiery Phoenix, and today I'm going to take you through a simple tutorial to create over 5 metres, well over 5 yards of 1/2 inch double fold bias binding from a single fat quarter. And what makes this even better is that this technique only uses 2 cuts and 2 seams. There's lots of pressing, but we can't take pressing away when we're creating our bias binding. But that's what today's tutorial is about, so hopefully you'll stick around and have a look at how we create that. So here we are with our fat quarter, and what we're going to be doing is constructing a long length of bias binding using our fat quarter. Traditionally people would cut off slices of the fat quarter manually and then attach them individually, but what we're going to do is we're going to create a twisted tube so that it's a giant spiral, so that as we cut through it we end up with one really long piece of bias binding. So what we're going to need to do this is obviously our fat quarter. We're going to need scissors. We won't be using a rotary cutter for this particular technique. A pencil, because everything is going to be done on the reverse of the fabric and it's going to be folded in on top of itself. I'm not too fussed about using an actual pencil rather than a water erasable marker or some chalk. Obviously you can use chalk, you can use the erasable markers or air erasable markers, but for this instance I'm not too fussed and it's going to be perfectly fine for me to use a pencil. And you will need to have a ruler so that you can measure and mark the width of your bias binding, and I've got my pressing board so that I can press open the 2 seams that we'll be creating. In this method you only have to create the 2 seams, whereas if you cut out individual strips you then have to assemble them all together, which is much more time consuming. So whilst this might seem a little bit confusing to begin with, overall it really isn't. What we're going to do is we're going to work with our selvage on the right, and we're going to have the cross grain across the base of our board, and we will take the furthest corner away and fold that down, which will give us our 45-degree angle. And we can double check this by just looking at it against the 45-degree line on our measuring board. Hopefully you can see that there, and that actually is a very nice 45-degree angle. Now you could press that, or you could just simply cut along it. Now I'm just going to cut along it. I don't really feel the need to press that. So you hold it tight with one hand, and then we cut along the fold with our scissors. And this gives us a lovely 45-degree angle. And we will soon be in the position to sew our first seam, which means we're practically done, because there's only 2 seams to do in the whole thing. So we now have our original square, and what we're going to do is move this along so that we create a parallelogram. So I will move this across. We'll have right edges together, or the right sides together. Hopefully this pattern makes it very easy to see where those right sides and wrong sides are. To sew this seam in, I'm actually using my 1/4 inch foot to make sure that I am as accurate with all my measurements as possible throughout this project, and I'm going to be using a stitch length of 1.5. I just want to make sure that I've got as much stitching in place, because everything's going to be sliced through, so there'll only be short connections once this has been finished. So we'll just pop that under here, hold the loose square spare, and stitch on through. And you can adjust the edging accordingly as you go along to make sure that everything is lined up neatly. So now I'm going to press these seams open. We've got our parallelogram. So if you want to know how to make one of these pressing boards, I can give you the link. But the first thing we're going to do is set this seam and then press it open, which won't take long at all. also trim away the excess threads. There we go. It's much easier if you have long nails. I don't this week, but that still won't make it impossible. Okay, so now that that is pressed open, we can move on to the next stage, which is marking out our lines. So these will become our cutting lines once we've marked this all off. And I'm going to trim away the slight excess that we've got along here. We don't need that. So we're going to flip this over to the reverse side, and where we've already got our lovely 45-degree angle, I'm going to use that, and I'm going to mark in the width of the bias binding strips that we'll be cutting. As we're making 1/2 inch wide double folded bias tape, we're going to need to cut this at 2-inch widths. So we'll simply measure along the 2-inch line, along the bias feed that we already have, or along the bias edge that we already have. There we are. And then draw in our cutting line. Slide up as needed. Move this along. And one of the things that we should really be keeping in mind is that we want to use a thin, narrow nib on whatever we're using. A fat chalk won't be very helpful because we then lose the accuracy of our cut. So I shall do one more for you. And I'll fizz on through and come back to you in a moment. So now that we have all of our stripes marked across the breadth of this parallelogram, across this piece of our fabric, we've got our vertical seam, we've got our two grain line sides, and we've got our two angled bias sides. What we need to do is trim away this excess because it's not even, it's narrower this end than that, and also it's not wide enough to be any use in our binding strip. So we'll just quickly snip that away. So that's still a piece of bias, it's just not, and then you can see the stretch, it's just not going to be any use for this particular project. So what we now need to do is join these sides together, and we're not going to join them like this because then we'd simply be cutting off rings of fabric. What we will be doing is offsetting them so that we then have two tails either side, and then we're going to join up the other lines. However, we're not going to join them like this so that they match when they're laid out, and then we pick them up and they won't match then. So what we're going to be doing, the first thing I'm going to do is stick a pin in either end. We do not want these tails connecting to anything, and by popping a pin on the end that should remind us. So one more time, what we do is fold one end up We have a pin, we fold the other end down and we have a pin, and then we simply pull those two pinned ends one row over. And I think that's the easiest way to get everything to line up initially. And what we now need to do is take our pins and 1/4 of an inch down. And now if you're not any good at working out how far 1/4 of an inch is, you can draw a 1/4 of an inch line on either side. But what you're going to do is put a pin in at the 1/4 of an inch mark, and then on the other side you're going to put the pin through again at the 1/4 of an inch mark, and that is where those seams will then join up. So we'll do that one more time. So we'll take 1/4 of an inch here, and we'll take 1/4 of an inch this side, and we'll put our pins through, and that will give us our mark for crossing over and lining everything up. And as you see, this now lines up very nicely. The same. So what we're going to do is, if I can get this in focus, you should be able to see we've got one line here which we've already pinned. We have another line here which we're going to pin, and we have another line on this side, if we can get that in the light, that we will be using to pin from the reverse. So the first thing we do is we grab a pin and we come down 1/4 of an inch on this first line, which is around here, and then we take the matching line on the reverse of the fabric. We can get that in shot. Let's see if we can find that. It's a matter of getting it to reflect. There we go. And then we put this through again 1/4 of an inch down for the matching line, and then once that pin is through, we can fold the fabric down and pin it in place. And as you can see, we don't have any excess fabric, we don't have any lumps or bumps along that edge line once we've got everything pinned in place. It's just making it accurate for the first time. And then we've got one last one to do, just so you can see that in close up one last time. Let's see if we can get that line showing on camera for you now. So we put the pin in 1/4 of an inch down, turn the fabric over and match it another 1/4 of an inch down, pull them square, and then we're done. And then we have one last which we can just pin in place. There's nowhere else for it to go. Now that we have everything in place, we can remove those extra pins from the two tails. And it looks wonky. It is wonky because we're creating a spiral. So what we're going to do is just fold that out of the way and run 1/4 of an inch seam down the side. And this is the only other sewing that we need to do for this project, and we are almost done. Again, keeping the stitch length to 1.5. And in this case I will be just back tacking to make sure it's all secure before I start. And then removing the pins as I go along this edge. Now that is all of the sewing done, and we should be able to see that these lines are now working together, they're now lining up. So we're just going to press this open, and then we can start cutting. I'll just be very gentle as we work with it, now that everything is twisted and on the bias. Now that that has been opened out, that seam, what we're going to do is cut along the line that we have already marked. The line that we put through as individual lines should now reveal itself as one continuous length of binding. The first part of converting our flat opened binding into a usable form of bias binding. This is a double fold bias, so what we're going to do is to start off by pressing it halfway and try not to stretch it or put tension on it, or else you'll end up with a bias that's wonky. It will be not as easy to use. It won't be as effective if you've stretched it out of alignment. So be gentle. Don't force anything to happen. Just kind of go with the fabric. And once you have pressed the entire length in half, we'll then come back, open it out, and press everything into the centre. So now we have our completed piece of bias binding. It has been folded, it's been pressed, and it's been folded back on itself one final time. So hopefully, having followed this process, you've found it very useful. I have indeed only used 2 cuts and only 2 seams, although there is still an awful lot of pressing. But hopefully you found this useful, and I'll be using this in the next tutorial, which is coming up for a kimono wrap for part of the Pyjama Fairies project. But I'll give you more information on that next time around. But for now, hopefully this has proved useful, and I will see you again soon. Bye for now.